7 months ago, I testified in favor of the House version of this bill. I spoke of the trauma of last January's fatal shooting of my friend, Dr. Michael Davidson, and the violent assaults against nurses following that tragedy. I also talked about the failure of hospital management to respond. Since that hearing last summer, Brigham nurses have worked hard to improve security, but without a law requiring hospitals to work with staff to adopt violence prevention programs, we face an uphill battle. Our efforts have been met with half-hearted fixes. Management has failed to address underlying security problems. The hospital has received 2 OSHA warning letters within the last 6 weeks, yet they refuse to make concrete promises. I am saddened and frustrated to report that Brigham nurses feel less safe now than they did over a year ago. After the shooting, we tried to make our voices heard on security, but the hospital gave us only lip service. Brigham and Partners Healthcare refused to value our input or put into place our ideas which were generated on the front lines of patient care. We were forced to bring our concerns into contract negotiations last September. Since then, security has been our top priority at the bargaining table. We have tried to reach agreement on issues like lockdown procedures and active shooter drills. As you heard, Dan Linsky, and I thank God every day that we have him, used his years of experience with the Boston Police Department to identify security flaws in proposals. In December, our concerns were validated by OSHA. The federal agency sent a warning letter to the hospital outlining 14 ways to improve security. They got another letter just a week ago. The recommendations mirrored our own. Yet 6 months into negotiations, hospital management has not put a single security proposal into enforceable contract language. Any changes made so far only happened because of our pressure. But what they are doing falls short. Just last week, Brigham staff saw an example of management's defective response. Under pressure from staff nurses with Dan Linsky's guidance, the hospital had finally made it possible to secure the entrances of the Shapiro building. Management announced last Monday that access to Shapiro would be restricted from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. The next morning, a staff nurse reported that at 5:45 a.m., people were accessing the Shapiro without security checks, and I'd like to add in street clothes, not in hospital garb. We want even better security around the clock, but the hospital won't even secure entrances overnight at the hospital, as promised. Brigham nurses have more ability to advocate for hospital safety than many healthcare professionals. We stand together, licensed by the state to protect and care for our patients. We know our concerns are valid. We know our voices are protected. Despite that strength, management can still refuse to listen. This should terrify healthcare professionals across the Commonwealth. Without this law, safety can take a backseat to the stubbornness and profits of the hospital industry. Every healthcare worker in the Commonwealth would be protected under this law, whether or not they are unionized. Unions should not be a substitute for good government regulation to keep people safe. And I'd just like to add on a personal note, just because my fellow staff in the trauma unit knew I was coming here today, and I'd like to add that it saddens us very much that Brigham and Women's Hospital CEO Betsy Nabel and the Chief Nursing Officer Jackie Somerville have made comments that somehow the nurses are taking advantage of our friend Mike Davidson's murder. I was working that day in the trauma unit when Mike came. We, my friends, my colleagues, the nurses and doctors of the Brighams worked for 10 hours to save Mike's life, and we were unsuccessful. It is absolutely, so sad that our employer would imply such a thing. And also, the other day when I was in the trauma unit working on a trauma, the doctors, the nurses, the aides, everyone just said to me to bring that message to you guys and told me to keep fighting. So on a personal level, as a friend of a person who was murdered at my hospital, that's my message as well. Thank you.
Well, we hope to be successful this year on 1313. Are there any questions from the panel?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, excuse me, sir. Chair?
You go to my point that I was thinking of is with your elegant and articulate and eloquent testimony, and I find it outrageous that any inference or implication like that has been made by your management. And my question to you is only partially rhetorical, but why, as with so many other things, and if anybody from the previous panel wants to testify, Why are just the nurses here carrying the water on this? Where are the docs?
Well-
Where's the Mass Medical Association?
Right.
I mean, we have to pull them kicking and screaming into the opioid crisis. Why aren't they here on this? And I know you probably don't have any.
Well,
it's not your responsibility to answer.
I will
that,
say
but-
my personal opinion, though, as I've worked at the Brigham many years, I am good friends with the doctors, very good friends, and the Brigham's been very good to me. I want to make it clear, I love Brigham Women's Hospital. I think we're an excellent hospital. We give excellent care. I think under our prior leadership, Dr. Gary Gottlieb and Mairead Hickey, Chief Nursing Officer, this wouldn't be happening. I think this is a partners. For myself, I feel it's partners, and they're putting profits before safety for everyone. But also the doctors are not protected. The doctors who do speak out, they get retaliation. They do not have that free, you think, like, I think sometimes the public think, I work with surgeons, trauma surgeons, and they think, oh, a trauma surgeon, they could have that ego to speak out or something. They don't. They don't have that protection. They could be fired at the Brigham. Look at Dr. Dennis Burke at Mass General, who spoke out about double booking on surgeries. It's a perfect example, a world-renowned surgeon, also a friend of mine. So the doctors do not have that freedom that we do, and they too are, they support us very much. Like I say, Mike was a good friend of mine. I'm friends with his best friends, fellow surgeons. I've been, Mike, who was murdered, he did my Pan Mass Challenge fundraiser. He was a member of a band. These are friends of ours, and this came home to us in the most awful way. And since that time, I've had fellow nurses, a few who are here today, Brigham nurses, one who had a 10-inch knife pulled to her throat, another nurse who was threatened by a family member. He called the Dan Ray radio show saying that he was going to come to the Brigham and get the nurses on the 12th floor. I mean, just crazy stuff. We've had knives. We've had blood squirted in our faces that were HIV and Hep C positive. A knife just in the NICU, a nursery intensive care unit in the family waiting area just last week. This is happening, and if it can happen at the Brigham, a top 10 hospital in the nation, if not the world, then what's happening at our fellow hospitals? You say, why is someone here from the Mass General not here from Mass General Nursing? Because they're afraid. They get retaliated against, and I will tell you at the Brigham, I have the nurses that I say are here today, they have been retaliated against, and their fears minimized. When you have a 10-inch knife pulled on you and you're told somehow it was your fault by a family member, I mean, it's insane. And I think with Dan Linsky here, like I say, I thank God every day that I have a family member who's a Boston police officer put me in touch with him, because Dan, we've had dozens of nurses physically attacked, punched, guns, everything pulled on them just since the shooting. And Dan is the one who's reached out to them. He's the one who's helped them. He's helped us file Boston police reports.
You're kind and you're gracious to stick up for your friends who are doctors. And individually, yes, they are at risk and they may get retaliated against. But they have an organization, too.
I wish they
that can
would.
speak for them.
I feel that I'm a bit protected, but even myself, my colleagues who have been beaten and had knives pulled on them, they've had retaliation. It's then they're going to go try to find something that maybe you didn't dot a T or cross an I, or maybe you didn't sign a med off right on time. So they go after that instead of the knife being pulled. Or, I had a nurse who was beaten in July and admitted to our emergency room. The security guard had been pulled off the patient, a violent 300-pound psychotic patient, and she was attacked. She was in the emergency room. Not 4 hours later, they pulled the security guard off again because of staffing, and another nurse was attacked. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I can't believe it. I'm just so sad that I'm here. I wish it wasn't the case, but, and I don't think, I feel like we're fighting for all the nurses and patients and all healthcare workers. And for myself personally, I'm fighting to get the Brigham way back, where patients and employees' safety come first before profit margins. And sad to say, that's how I feel.
Myself and the co-chair are committed to not just wages and hours, but certainly working conditions, and we're committed with the committee to advance this and hopefully make this law.
Thank you.
A very important one.
I'll have to take up the banner from the great Michael Brady of Brockton. There you go.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Yeah,
you
what's
so
your
much.
organization?